The galaxy was vast, filled with countless alien species, each with its own strengths and unique abilities. Most of them had mastered the art of war, politics, and technology. But to the eyes of many, humans were still considered weak, a species barely worth noticing. The idea of a human soldier being important on the battlefield was laughable. Azara, a fierce alien commander, led one of the most respected warrior teams in the galaxy. Her race, the Vraxians, were known for their incredible strength and tactical genius. She had seen countless battles, won many wars, and never once doubted the superiority of her people. That is, until she met Ethan, the lone human soldier assigned to her team for a critical mission. As soon as Azara saw him, she scoffed. He was shorter than her, his features plain, and his uniform looked like it had seen better days. His presence seemed almost unnecessary, like an afterthought. Just a human, she muttered under her breath. Her Vraxian soldiers, towering and strong, shared similar doubts. Ethan, however, didn't seem to mind. He had been through countless missions before, always underestimated, always overlooked. He had grown used to this. Instead of letting it affect him, he focused on his mission to help retrieve an important device from a distant planet, a mission that could change the future of the galaxy. Azara was in charge, and it was her plan that everyone was expected to follow. As the team gathered around the command table, Azara outlined the mission, detailing the dangers they would face. The planet they were heading to was notorious for its harsh conditions and fierce alien predators. It was a place where even the most experienced warriors could be lost forever. Only the strongest will survive, Azara said, her voice full of confidence. And that's why I'm in charge. The Vraxian warriors nodded in agreement, but Ethan remained silent. His comments caught Azara's attention, but she quickly dismissed it. He was just a human. What could he possibly add to the team? As their ship began its descent into the hostile planet's atmosphere, Azara turned to Ethan, her eyes narrowing. Don't get in the way. This mission is too important to waste time babysitting. Ethan nodded. Understood, he replied simply. But inside, he was already thinking. He had learned long ago that the best way to survive in situations like this wasn't by fighting with brute force, but by using your mind, your strategy, and knowing when to act. Azara, with all her strength and combat prowess, was still only one person. He, on the other hand, had a mind that could think of 1,000 possibilities in the blink of an eye. When they landed, the planet greeted them with a fierce eggs. There was a strange feeling in the air, something he couldn't quite explain. The storm was fierce. Yes, but it wasn't the weather that made him uneasy. It was the silence of the planet, the way everything seemed to be waiting for something. Stay alert, Azara commanded, her voice carrying over the sound of the wind. This planet is home to creatures more dangerous than any of you have ever faced. But Ethan wasn't listening to her. His eyes were fixed on something else in the distance. Just beyond the storm's fury, he saw a shadow move. It wasn't an alien creature, at least. Not one he had ever seen. It was something else. Something that didn't quite fit with the rest of the planet's strange environment. Something's off. Ethan murmured, more to himself than anyone else. Azara didn't take him seriously. Focus on the mission, human. She snapped, but Ethan was already moving, stepping forward with a quiet purpose. His mind was racing, calculating his next move. He had learned long ago that there were times when the right decision was to act first and ask questions later. Human, where are you going? Azara shouted. But Ethan didn't answer. His instincts told him that whatever was out there was a bigger threat than they realized. If they didn't find it first, it might find them. Azara's voice grew impatient. You're wasting time. Get back here, now. But Ethan ignored her. His focus locked on the shadow. The wind howled louder, and the storm seemed to intensify. Whatever was out there was getting closer. Ethan had no time to argue with Azara. He had learned long ago that it was better to trust his gut than to wait for orders. As he moved closer to the shadow, he saw it clearly for the first time, a large, heavily armored alien creature. its glowing red eyes fixed on him. It was a hunter, and it had sensed his presence. Bizarra, finally realizing that Ethan was not going to stop, rushed to his side with her weapon drawn. "Move now," she ordered. But Ethan was already several steps ahead of her. Without a word, Ethan crouched low, taking cover behind a large rock. Azara followed, her sharp eyes scanning the environment. "Get your weapon ready. We might need to fight." But Ethan didn't reach for his rifle. Instead, he pulled out a small device from his pack, a device that seemed completely out of place. For someone like him, Azara was about to question him when Ethan's hands moved quickly, his fingers tapping away at the device. Within moments, he was hacking into the alien creature's weapon systems. The creature, still unaware, stood a few meters away, waiting for its prey to make the first move. Azara watched in confusion as the device in Ethan's hand flashed, and the alien creature's rifle suddenly powered down, its lights flickering and then dying completely. "What did you just do?" Azara demanded, unable to hide her surprise. Ethan simply looked up at her, a small smile playing on his lips. "I think I just saved your life." The alien creature stood motionless, its rifle now useless, as Ethan glanced back at Azara. Her expression was a mix of surprise and disbelief. She had seen warriors fight countless enemies, but this was something different. A human, with nothing but a small device, had disabled a creature that was supposed to be one of the galaxy's most dangerous hunters. Azara couldn't hide her frustration. She had thought that Ethan's quiet nature was simply the result of weakness, but now she wasn't so sure. "Explain," she demanded, her voice sharp. Ethan stood up, dusting himself off. "It's a simple hack. Their weapons rely on a specific frequency to operate. I just tapped into it." "That's it?" Azara couldn't believe it. One moment, the creature was preparing to strike. In the next, it was powerless, thanks to a human soldier and a small device. "Yes," Ethan replied casually, as if disabling an enemy rifle was something he did every day. "But there's more. It's not just the weapons we need to worry about. We need to find out who or what is controlling these creatures. This planet feels wrong. It's been set up to lure us in." Azara's eyes narrowed. "Lure us in? What are you talking about? This is an ambush, not some carefully orchestrated trap." Ethan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he scanned the horizon, his mind working through the possibilities. Something wasn't adding up. The storm, the creatures, the strange signals. It was all too organized. The enemy knew exactly what they were doing, and Ethan suspected they weren't working alone. Azara, frustrated with the lack of answers, turned her attention to the creature that Ethan had neutralized. "You disabled its weapon. Great. But we still have to find the device and get off this planet alive." Ethan nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. He had no proof yet, but he trusted his instincts. The deeper they went, the more dangerous it felt. This wasn't just about retrieving the device anymore. There was something much larger at play. "I know," Ethan replied, "but we need to move carefully. I don't think we're the only ones hunting for that device." Azara hesitated before speaking. "You sound like you know more than you're letting on." Ethan didn't respond immediately, instead focusing on his surroundings. The tension in the air was thick, like they were walking into a trap with every step. Azara was right about one thing: they couldn't afford to waste time arguing. "I've studied this kind of technology before," he finally said, looking up at her. "Humans once developed devices like the one we're after, but we lost most of it. If the enemy's after it, they'll stop at nothing to get it." Azara glanced at him, her face unreadable. She was starting to see Ethan in a new light, but her pride wouldn't allow her to admit it just yet. "Fine, let's move." They continued deeper into the planet's strange landscape, the storm now just a distant howl behind them. The rocky terrain was difficult to navigate, but Ethan seemed to know exactly where to step. Azara, struggling to keep up, found herself reluctantly impressed. It wasn't just his intellect that was useful. His ability to adapt was something she hadn't expected from a human. The two of them moved in silence for a while, Azara's mind racing with thoughts about Ethan. She had seen human soldiers before, But none like him. He wasn't just following orders. He was thinking ahead, planning for things she couldn't see. The more she watched him, the more she realized that Ethan might be more than just a liability on this mission. Stay low, Ethan whispered, breaking the silence. He crouched, pointing to a small rock formation ahead. They're setting up a perimeter. Azara followed his gaze and saw the telltale signs of movement in the distance. It was difficult to see through the dense mist, but Ethan's eyes were sharp, catching things others would miss. She moved to follow his lead without questioning. The closer they got to the formation, the more intense the atmosphere became. Azara felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise. This wasn't a simple mission anymore. They were being hunted, and Ethan had known it from the start. They crouched behind the rocks, both of them watching the alien. Azara stared at him, confused. Wait for what? Ethan didn't answer, his attention fully on the alien patrol ahead. Azara, frustrated with the silence, shifted slightly. The moment she moved, the high-pitched sound from the device stopped. Ethan shot her a quick look and motioned for her to stay still. Azara frowned, but followed his instructions. She could hear the sounds of the alien patrol getting closer. The silence between them grew heavy, the tension almost unbearable. Finally, the aliens passed by. Not even noticing them behind the rocks, Ethan breathed a sigh of relief, lowering his hand. We move now. Azara couldn't help but stare at him. How did you know they would pass? Ethan gave her a small smile. Because they're following patterns. It's all about predicting where they'll go next. Azara nodded slowly, a new respect forming in her eyes. This human wasn't just a soldier. He was a strategist. And perhaps, just perhaps, he might be the key to surviving this mission. The hours passed as Ethan and Azara navigated the dangerous terrain of the alien planet. The storm had begun to calm, but the air was still thick with tension. The sounds of distant creatures echoed in the distance, and the smell of damp earth filled their noses. Despite the quiet, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. It wasn't just the creatures. It felt as though the planet itself was waiting, as if the land had a secret it was keeping from them. Azara, still uneasy about her growing respect for Ethan, pushed forward. Her eyes scanned the area, always alert, but a part of her couldn't help but wonder how Ethan always seemed to be one step ahead. His calm demeanor, the way he handled the impossible situations with ease, and the way he disabled the alien creatures, rifle without breaking a sweat. It was unlike anything Azara had expected from a human. But she would never admit it aloud. Ethan, for his part, was content to let Azara lead the way. He had no interest in proving himself to her. The only thing that mattered now was the mission. He knew that the device they were searching for had the potential to change everything for both humans and aliens if they didn't find it first. Someone else would, and they might not be so merciful. As they continued their journey, they came upon an old structure hidden deep in the rocky terrain. It was partially covered by vines and moss, making it difficult to spot from a distance. Ethan's eyes lit up when he saw it. This was at the location of the device. Azara halted beside him, noticing his sudden change in expression. What is it? She asked, her voice low. Ethan didn't answer right away. He was already moving toward the structure, his curiosity driving him forward. The building looked ancient, unlike anything Azara had seen before. It was clear that it wasn't built by any alien species they had encountered. The technology was distinctly human. At least, it resembled the type of tech humans once used. Centuries ago, this place, Ethan said quietly, was built by humans long before the war. It was one of our research stations. It looks like we finally found it. Azara's brow furrowed. A human station. But how is this possible? I thought your people lost everything during the Great War. Ethan nodded, his gaze fixed on the structure. We did, but not everything. Some things survived hidden, lost to time. This device is one of those things. We need it, Azara. If we don't find it first, the galaxy might never know what hit it. Azara glanced at him, the weight of his words sinking in. Then let's get to it. They approached the entrance, where the door was cracked open. As if waiting for them, Ethan crouched down inspecting the ancient technology around him. With a steady hand, he acted as Zara, though skeptical, stayed alert. The last thing they needed was for more of the alien creatures to show up while they were trapped in a confined space for several minutes. The only sound in the room was the faint hum of the machines as Ethan worked. Finally, the screen in front of him blinked to life, and a series of complex data began to appear. Azara stepped closer, trying to make sense of the symbols and figures on the screen. "What is this?" "It's the coordinates to the device," Ethan said, his voice full of excitement. "And more. There's something else here, an additional security layer." Azara frowned. "You mean it's protected?" Ethan nodded. "Yes. Whoever built this didn't want it to fall into the wrong hands. But that's not all. There's a message here, one that could explain everything." Eagerly, Ethan began to decrypt the message. As the words slowly appeared, Azara leaned in to read them. The message was short, but it was chilling. "To whomever finds this, the device you seek holds unimaginable power. It was created to change the course of the war. But it is also a weapon that must never fall into the wrong hands. If you are human, know that this device can destroy you all." Azara's heart sank as she read the last line. "A weapon? You're saying this thing could destroy us all?" Ethan's expression was grave. "That's what the message says. But it's more complicated than that. The device isn't just a weapon. It has the potential to change the way the galaxy functions. Its power could reshape everything. We have to be careful. If we don't control it, we could be the ones destroyed." Azara, for the first time, felt a deep sense of unease. She had seen the destruction that powerful weapons could cause, but it was different. The device they were after wasn't just about war. It was about the balance of power in the galaxy. Ethan turned away from the console, his face pale. "I knew it was dangerous, but I didn't realize the extent of it. We need to make sure it's used responsibly. If the wrong people get their hands on it, the galaxy could be thrown into chaos." Azara glanced at him, seeing him in a new light. Despite his quiet demeanor, Ethan was right. This wasn't just about retrieving a device. It was about saving the galaxy from something far worse than they could imagine. The tension in the air was thick, the weight of the device's potential hanging over them both. Ethan and Azara had no time to lose. The encrypted message they had uncovered left them with one clear thought. The device was far more than a simple tool. It was a weapon capable of reshaping the entire galaxy if it fell into the wrong hands. As they stood in the dimly lit control room, Ethan's mind raced. "We need to leave," he said, turning to Azara. "The longer we stay here, the more likely it is that others will find us." Azara nodded, her face serious. She had always relied on her strength and the strength of her soldiers, but now she understood that brute force might not be enough. She couldn't ignore the unease that had been growing in her chest since the moment they stepped foot on the planet. "Right?" Azara replied, her voice low. "But we still don't know who's behind all of this. Someone must have been controlling those creatures, setting the traps." Ethan frowned. "We'll figure it out when we're safely off this planet. We can't risk getting caught." Azara agreed, but the unease in her stomach gnawed at her. There was something she wasn't telling Ethan. She had received a private transmission earlier, a signal from her superiors. They were aware of her mission, and they wanted the device, no questions asked. But Azara had a choice to make. Her loyalty had always been to her people, but now, the idea of handing over such a powerful weapon to the wrong hands filled her with dread. She had seen firsthand how power could corrupt, and this device, it was something the galaxy could not afford to misuse. As they made their way back toward the ship, Azara kept her thoughts to herself. She knew what she had to do, but telling Ethan would complicate everything. The human had proven to be a valuable asset, but she had no idea where his true loyalties lay. What if he wasn't who he appeared to be? They arrived at the landing site, where their ship was parked, hidden from the view of any potential enemies. But as they approached, something was wrong. The ship's systems were offline, the hull was damaged, and smoke billowed from one of the engines. "Someone sabotaged our ship," Ethan said, his voice tight with frustration. "We're stuck here." Azara's heart sank. This was no ordinary sabotage. The damage wasn't random. Whoever had done this knew exactly where to hit. They had been followed. "We need to get inside and check the systems," Azara said, her voice more urgent now. They rushed toward the ship, weapons at the ready. But as they reached the entrance, they were met with an unexpected sight. A small group of Vraxian soldiers stood in front of them, their weapons drawn. At the front of the group was Draxon, one of Azara's closest commanders. "Azara," Draxon's voice was low and cold. "We've been looking for you." Azara's heart skipped a beat. She had hoped to avoid this confrontation. She knew that Draxon and the other commanders were loyal to the old ways, to the ruthless tactics that Azara had begun to question. But she hadn't expected him to come after her so soon. "What are you doing here, Draxon?" Azara asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "We were supposed to finish the mission, not start a war." Draxon's lips curled into a thin smile. "The mission was always a cover, Azara. You think you can run off with the device and keep it for yourself? You've been compromised." Ethan stood beside Azara, his eyes flicking from one soldier to the next. "What's going on here?" he asked, his tone calm but wary. Azara turned to him, her face hardening. "They're here for the device," she said, not bothering to explain further. "But I'm not handing it over to them." Draxon took a step forward, his eyes flashing with anger. "You think you can protect it? You don't even understand the true power of what you're carrying. The galaxy needs this weapon. It belongs to us, not to you." Azara's grip tightened around her weapon. "I won't let it be used to destroy everything. Not after what I've seen." Draxon's expression darkened. "You've lost your way, Azara. You always were weak, even when you didn't know it." Before Azara could respond, Draxon motioned to his soldiers. Without warning, they opened fire. Azara and Ethan dove for cover behind the damaged ship, the sound of blaster fire ringing in their ears. "We need to get out of here," Ethan shouted over the noise, but Azara was already moving. She was a trained warrior, and her reflexes were honed for situations like this. She peered out from behind the ship, aiming her blaster at Draxon's group. But something strange happened as Azara took aim. Her mind flashed back to the transmission she had received earlier, the order to retrieve the device and bring it back at any cost. She had thought it was from her superiors, but now she wondered if it had been a trap. The message was clear: use the device or lose everything. Ethan, noticing her hesitation, glanced at her. "What's wrong?" Azara's jaw tightened. She couldn't explain everything to him, not now. But the truth was, she had been betrayed. Draxon wasn't the only one after the device. Her own people wanted it too, and they would stop at nothing to take it. Without another word, she turned toward Ethan. "We need to fight our way out of here. If we don't, we're both dead." Azara could feel the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She had trusted Draxon, but now she knew she had to make a choice, one that might change the galaxy forever. The gunfire continued to echo in the distance as Azara and Ethan remained hidden behind the damaged ship. The situation had turned from bad to worse in a matter of moments. Draxon and his soldiers were closing in, and there was no way they could stand their ground much longer. Azara's mind raced. She had always been in control, always had a plan. But now, nothing seemed certain. Ethan glanced over at her, noticing her hesitation. "Azara, we need to move. They're going to overrun us if we stay here." Azara didn't respond immediately. She was too focused on the shifting feelings inside her. She had always trusted the Vraxians, her people. But the betrayal she had just experienced left a sour taste in her mouth. How had everything gone so wrong? She had trusted Draxon, and now she realized he was nothing more than another soldier, loyal only to his own ambition. As Ethan pulled her from her thoughts, she nodded sharply. "You're right," she said, pushing the doubt to the back of her mind. "We can't stay here. But where do we go? We can't let them have the device. We'll think of something." Ethan replied calmly. "We still have a chance, but we need to stay ahead of them. We have to find a way to use the environment to our advantage." Azara's eyes darted around, looking for an escape route. The rocky terrain around them was difficult to navigate, but it offered some cover. A few large boulders jutted out from the ground, and the towering cliffs in the distance could provide the height they needed to escape the soldiers' line of sight. Without wasting another moment, Azara turned to Ethan. "We'll head for the cliffs. We can use the height to our advantage." Ethan nodded and followed her lead as they sprinted across the open space. The sounds of pursuit grew louder behind them. They could hear Draxon's voice barking orders. But Azara didn't dare look back. She focused on the path ahead, the only thing that mattered now. Survival. The cliffs were still a ways off, but they were getting closer. The wind had picked up again, pushing dust and debris into their faces. As they reached a narrow crevice between two rocks, they slowed down, catching their breath. Azara could feel her heart pounding in her chest, her mind still racing with thoughts of betrayal. "Azara," Ethan said, his voice quieter now, "you don't have to do this alone. I'm here to help." Azara's eyes met his, and for the first time since the mission began, she saw something in him. Not just a human soldier, but someone who truly cared about the outcome of this mission, not just for himself, but for everyone involved. It was a strange feeling, something she hadn't expected to find in someone from a species she had always thought of as inferior. She took a deep breath, feeling a moment of clarity. "I know. But the device, I have to make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands." Ethan nodded, his eyes firm. "We'll protect it together." Their brief moment of silence was shattered by the sound of approaching footsteps. Azara quickly motioned for Ethan to follow her. They climbed up the narrow passage and reached the base of the cliffs. The steep rock face before them looked challenging, but it was the only way to escape. Azara scaled the cliff with practiced ease, using the rocks to pull herself up. Ethan followed closely behind, his movements quicker than Azara expected. They reached the top, where the wind howled around them. The view from above was breathtaking, but there was no time to admire it. They had to keep moving. From here, they could see the entire area below, including Draxon and his soldiers still searching for them. "We need to get to the ridge," Azara said, pointing to a narrow trail that ran along the cliff's edge. "We can't risk being seen from below." Ethan nodded and led the way, his footsteps light but purposeful. As they moved along the ridge, the wind grew fiercer, but they had no choice but to keep going. Azara could feel the weight of the device in her pack and the responsibility that came with it. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about protecting something that could change the entire galaxy. The thought made her stomach turn. The more she thought about it, the more she realized the device was both a blessing and a curse. "Azara," Ethan said, breaking her thoughts, "we're not far from the next safe zone. We'll make it." Azara didn't respond right away, lost in her own thoughts. She knew that Ethan was right, but a part of her felt the burden of the situation more deeply than she had let on. The betrayal by her own people weighed heavily on her. How could she have been so blind? She had always prided herself on being strong, on knowing what was best for her people. But now, her faith in them had been shattered. As they continued along the ridge, Azara felt a pang of doubt in her chest. She had been trained to trust her instincts, but right now, they seemed clouded. Was she doing the right thing? Was she making the right choice? Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the air, and the ground beneath their feet shook. Azara's heart skipped a beat as she realized what was happening. An explosion. She muttered under her breath, "Stay down," Ethan shouted, grabbing her arm and pulling her to the ground as a shockwave passed through the air. Azara's mind raced. The explosion had come from below. Near the ship, Draxon was closing in, and they had just lost the element of surprise. "We need to get to the backup transport," Azara said, rising quickly. Now, Ethan nodded, and they moved faster. Urgency in every step. Their options were running out, and Azara could feel the weight of the device more heavily than ever before. Azara's heart raced as she and Ethan sprinted through the narrow trail. Along the cliff's edge, the explosion from earlier had rattled their nerves, but it had also made one thing clear: time was running out. They needed to find a way off this planet and secure the device before Draxon and his soldiers could catch up with them. The wind howled around them, making it harder to hear anything approaching, but Ethan's sharp eyes kept scanning the horizon. "We're not far from the backup transport," he said, his voice calm. Even though they were being hunted, Azara nodded, though the doubt still gnawed at her. She kept thinking about the device in her pack, the device that was far more than they had realized. Its power could change the entire galaxy, but in whose hands? Azara had spent her life believing in her people and their mission. But now, after everything that had happened, she wasn't sure who to trust anymore. "Keep moving," she urged, her voice cutting through her thoughts. "We can't afford to stop." Ethan glanced back at her, his expression thoughtful. "Azara, I know you're worried, but we're doing the right thing. We can't let this fall into the wrong hands." "I hope you're right," she said quietly, "because if we fail, everything changes not just for us, but for the entire galaxy." Ethan didn't respond, but he gave her a nod of understanding. They had both seen the way the galaxy had already started to shift, how powerful forces were beginning to take notice of the device if they didn't act fast, eventually not with the device to protect. But there was one thing they could do: use the very terrain they were hiding into their advantage. "We have to split up," Azara said. Suddenly, "I'll lead them away. You get to the transport and take the device. Get to safety." Ethan turned to her, his face set with determination. "We don't split up. We stick together." "I can't risk losing the device," Azara replied, her voice hard. "If they get their hands on it, there's no telling what they'll do. You've seen the way they work." Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but Azara silenced him with a look. "I'll be fine. You have the skills to get out of here. Trust me." There was a moment of silence, but then Ethan finally nodded. "All right, but don't do anything reckless." Azara smiled faintly. "You're one to talk." Without another word, they parted ways. Azara moved quickly, using the rocks to hide her movements, while Ethan made his way toward the transport. She could feel the weight of the device pressing against her back as she sprinted. Her mind focused on one thing: leading the soldiers away from Ethan and the transport. As she ran, she set a small explosive charge on the path, making sure it was hidden from view. She knew it would draw attention, and that's exactly what she needed. She had to make sure Ethan got the device to safety. The soldiers below were getting closer. Azara took a deep breath and activated the charge. The explosion was deafening, sending a shockwave through the air. Dust and debris flew into the air, obscuring her movements. The soldiers reacted instantly, scrambling toward the explosion. Azara didn't stop to see the results. She darted in the opposite direction, weaving between the rocks and staying as low as possible. The sound of running footsteps filled the air, but she didn't look back. Meanwhile, Ethan was making his way toward the transport, his heart pounding. He knew that Azara was doing her best to keep the soldiers occupied, but it was only a matter of time before they realized what was happening. He couldn't afford to wait. He had to get the device to safety. He reached the transport just as he heard the sounds of the soldiers approaching. With a quick glance over his shoulder, he stepped inside, locking the door behind him. He immediately began powering up the systems, his fingers moving quickly over the console. The ship's engines roared to life, and the transport lifted off the ground. Ethan exhaled in relief. But his relief was short-lived. As the ship ascended, he saw the silhouette of a larger vessel approaching in the distance. They weren't safe yet. "Azara, we're not done yet," he muttered to himself, his mind already working on a plan to evade the incoming ship. Back on the ground, Azara had led the soldiers deep into the rocky canyon. She had lost them for now, but the pressure was mounting. Her heart was racing. She knew she had to get back to the transport, but it wouldn't be easy. Her mind kept drifting back to the device. There was no going back now. She had made her choice, and no matter what happened, she wouldn't let the galaxy fall into the wrong hands. Not again. Azara's heart pounded in her chest as she sprinted through the canyon, the sound of pursuing soldiers growing louder behind her. She could feel the weight of the device pressing against her back, a constant reminder of what was at stake. Every second counted. She had done everything to lead the soldiers away, but now she had to make sure she didn't get trapped. The rocks around her offered some cover, but she couldn't outrun them forever. She glanced over her shoulder, only for a moment, but it was enough to see the shadows of the soldiers closing in. Their heavy footsteps echoed off the canyon walls. She pushed herself harder, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Focus, Azara. Keep moving. A few meters ahead, she spotted a narrow passage between the rocks. She knew it wouldn't be enough to lose them, but it would give her a few more moments. She took the risk, ducking into the passage, her movement swift and controlled. She could hear the soldiers shouting orders behind her, but she didn't stop. Meanwhile, Ethan was in the transport, the ship now safely out of the canyon and into the open sky. He could feel the tension still in his chest, but he knew it wasn't over yet. The larger ship was still following him, gaining on the transport. With every passing second, he quickly analyzed the situation. He had the device, but he couldn't afford to lead the enemy directly to Earth. The galaxy wasn't ready for the power that the device held, and neither was he. Ethan knew they would stop at nothing to get their hands on it. He had to find a way to lose the larger ship before it could track him back to their base. Azara, he muttered under his breath. You better make it. Ethan punched in a new set of coordinates. Shifting course away from the enemy ship, the transport responded immediately. But the larger vessel didn't let up. Ethan's eyes were glued to the radar, tracking the enemies. Every move, he had to think fast. He glanced out the viewport, seeing the dark shape of the larger ship closing in on him. There was no way he could outrun it directly, but maybe he didn't have to. He could use the planet's atmosphere, the stormy weather, to his advantage. The larger ship wasn't built for maneuvering like the transport. If he could make the right move at the right moment, he might be able to throw them off. With a determined expression, Ethan pulled the transport into a sharp dive. The ship dipped into the thick clouds below, the turbulence rocking the small vessel. He held his breath, hoping the larger ship would be forced to follow. Down in the canyon, Azara had lost sight of her pursuers. She slowed to catch her breath. Still keeping her movements careful and quiet, she could feel the pressure mounting. The soldiers would be relentless, but she wasn't about to give up the device, not to them, not to anyone. Suddenly, she heard the sound of something overhead. The wind shifted, and she glanced up, spotting the transport, moving erratically through the thick clouds above. Ethan, she thought. She had to reach him. Azara made her way through the canyon, moving toward an open space where she could see the sky. The sound of her breath was all she could hear, and the only thing that kept her going was the thought of Ethan and the transport. She couldn't afford to fail. After what felt like an eternity, Azara reached the open clearing and saw the transport below, weaving through the storm. She moved quickly, hoping the soldiers wouldn't catch up before she could board. As if sensing the urgency, the transport began to descend, slower now, to allow her to reach it. Azara's pulse raced, but she kept her focus. She ran towards the ship, her steps growing faster as the distance closed. The soldiers behind her didn't seem to be far off. She could hear their voices growing louder. She reached the transport, just as the ship touched down, its engines whining in protest. With a final burst of speed, she jumped onto the transport's landing gear and pulled herself inside. Ethan, relieved to see her, immediately secured the door. I was beginning to think you weren't going to make it, he said, his voice quiet but laced with tension. Azara let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. I don't give up that easily. The transport rose into the air, once again, leaving the planet's surface behind. As they climbed higher, the larger ship followed them, but now they had more room to maneuver. Azara and Ethan exchanged a brief look, each knowing what needed to be done. We need to make sure they don't track us back, Ethan said, his fingers moving over the controls as he prepared to initiate the next phase of their escape. Azara nodded, turning her attention to the larger ship. We can't let them follow us. If they do, it's over. Ethan pulled up the data they had collected earlier, scanning through the information quickly. I've got an idea. We'll send a false signal to lead them away from Earth. They'll think they're tracking us, but in reality, we'll be long gone. Azara's eyes narrowed as she watched him work. She didn't question his plan. He had earned her trust. Do it with a few quick commands. Ethan sent a burst of data through the ship's communication system. The larger ship, still tailing them, immediately began to respond. Ethan's pulse quickened as he worked, pulling the transport into a steep dive, heading toward a nearby asteroid field. The larger ship followed. As predicted, they were getting close. Ethan punched in another set of coordinates, leading the enemy ship deeper into the asteroid field. I hope you know what you're doing, Azara muttered, her hand gripping the edge of the seat as the ship's engines roared to life. Ethan gave her a look, his face calm. I do. With the false signal set and the larger ship diverted into the asteroid field, Ethan turned the transport sharply. The ship veered away from the path, and in an instant, the enemy vessel was lost behind a cloud of asteroids. Azara exhaled, relieved but still on edge. They had done it, but as she sat back, staring out into the void, she knew this was only the beginning. The galaxy had already begun to shift, and this device could either save it or destroy it. It was in their hands now. The alliance between her and Ethan, to unlikely allies, was just starting, and together they would face whatever came next.